Well, it's nice to see everyone again. Today we're continuing on our series in 1 Corinthians called What About It? If you can remember, we're looking at the answers to some questions that were asked by the church in Corinth that were to Paul, and he gave specific answers. Of course, we have the answers, and then we can assume the questions from the answers Paul gives. And sometimes we don't really know what he's asking, and we kind of have to, do our best to understand the question. The chapter we're looking at today, very clear. We know the questions pretty much and definitely. Paul gives a lot of details. Today we're looking at the idea of marriage, found in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, the role of marriage in the life of Christians. But I want to give a warning. This is not a complete theology. This does not give all the details that God has about the idea of marriage. These are just answers to specific questions that the church in Corinth had. And a lot of their questions were because, they're Gentiles. They weren't held marriage the same way that someone who is a Jew would, or the way that a Christian would. So they asked Paul very directly about the way they should see marriage in their life. So when we think about marriage, it's hard, it's work, it takes some time and effort. And to a Gentile who just converted, it seemed like, it would take away from my service to the Lord. And to us, that's kind of a silly thing to think, but they're doing it from the right heart. They're thinking, if I am not married, that means I can serve the Lord with more of my time and effort. And so we think that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but to them, that's what they truly were thinking. I remember when me and Meg were engaged, my grandmother has not been married for a long time, and I asked, Grandmommy, why have you never remarried? And she said, Jacob, it's too much like work. It's too hard. Just not going to do it. And that's true. It's difficult. And in chapter 7, Paul's going to give them details about marriage, divorce, remarriage. And I believe that all of his thoughts boiled down to one thought. And so this is the thought we're going to have today. Marriage was made and instituted by God. There's a lot of in-betweens, a lot of questions we're going to answer, but in the end, Paul's going to give details, and we're going to see, God instituted it, so it can be a good thing, used for the lifting up of the saints and the church. So the first thing we're going to see, our first point, is that marriage, it's a gift. It's a gift, something that should be cherished, something that should be used and seen as a good thing. The first point we see in the first verse, the question is asked, should a Christian be married? Is it best for a Christian to be married or to be single? And Paul answers, and he says, now concerning the things which you wrote, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. But because of the immoralities, each man is to have his own wife, and each woman is to have her own husband. So the answer, should a Christian be married? Yes. It's good to be married, so you do not give in to sin, specifically sexual sins. He says because of immorality. When we read that, we go, Paul, you're not really holding marriage too highly. You say if you're going to sin, then go ahead and get married. But Paul, we have to see, he's not going against marriage, and he's not going against what Jesus talks about marriage. We have to see this in context. You see, the city of Corinth, it was sinful. It was Gentile, and a lot of the things they did to worship other gods involved, sexual sin. And so what he's telling them, if you're caught up in this sin, or you have the propriety to do this type of thing and sin against God, and you have the opportunity to get married so it's in the covenant of marriage. So if they're already practicing this thing because of their immoralities, be married. It's a gift from God. Use it. We know that God instituted marriage, so it can't be a bad thing. In Genesis 2:18, it says, it is not good for a man to be alone. Well, what did God do about it? Well, I'll make him a helper suitable for him. And so since the beginning, marriage has been there with Adam and Eve. God made marriage, and the wife is for the sake of the man, and it's not there, but the husband, I believe, is also for the sake of the woman. They're there to be there for each other, to lift each other up, to encourage, to not make sure they're not alone. And I believe Paul, he says, it doesn't seem like he's saying that he holds it highly, but he does. And if you look at verse 7, Paul agrees that marriage is a gift. He says, "Yet I wish that all men were even as I myself am." That's celibate. That's unmarried. However, each man has his own gift from God, one in this manner and another in that. Well, marriage is a gift. Being celibate or single, well, it's a gift too. In all situations, you can see, as a gift from God, and that's what we would call being content where you're at. But we have to understand that there was a lot of pressure for the Gentiles to marry each other. You see, the Jews of the time believed every person should be married. And so when the Jewish people got converted to Christianity, they brought that in, and that some believed that if you weren't married, well, then you're not right with God. God instituted it, you have to be married, but Paul doesn't carry on that idea. He says that I wish everyone was like me, celibate, unmarried. And some believe that he was married at one point when he became a Christian. His wife left. Some believe he might have been widowed. We don't know, but we do know he was celibate during this time of writing this letter. And I believe what he's saying is being unmarried is less complicated. Makes things a little bit easier, especially if Paul's situation, he's preaching, he's traveling, he's being persecuted. Would he put himself in some of these situations if he had a wife? I don't believe so, especially when it comes to his life being threatened because of his preaching. And he says that he's happy with his singleness, but because it makes him singularly focused on ministry. But he also knows that if you have the propriety for sin or you can't help yourself, then it keeps you from sin, being in marriage. If you're going to sin, marry. If you're struggling to stay pure, marry. But if you have self-control, stay unsingle. Focus on Christ. And you shouldn't just marry to avoid sin. Don't mishear me. Man and woman, we're not made to be alone. Marriage joins two for life. Marriage is beautiful. Marriage should never be taken lightly or underappreciated. Marriage should be seen as a gift from God. A man once wrote, marriage is way more interesting than divorce. It's the only time an immovable object successfully meets an irresistible force. You can guess which one I am. I'm probably the immovable object, if I'm going to be honest, not the irresistible force. But I think that's pretty good. We see that marriage is a gift from God. The second thing Paul talks about is that marriage should be used as a ministry used by God. In verses 10 through 11, Paul goes on to speak about divorce and the role and life of a Christian and says, "But to be married I give instructions, not I, but the Lord, the wife should not leave her husband. But if she does leave, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And that husband should not divorce his wife." So he's talking to Christians. These are two Christians. Got to think of that. Two already been converted to Christ. He's saying, do not divorce your wife. And you're for a wife, do not divorce your husband if you're Christians together. And when I read that, the first thing I think, well, Paul, what about Jesus? Didn't Jesus have something to say about divorce? And I don't believe Paul's going against the words of Christ. In Matthew 5:23 it says, "But Jesus talking, but I say to you, everyone who divorces his wife, except for the reason of unchastity, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." We know God is against divorce. We know that Paul's not opposing Jesus. It is true. It is better for two Christians to stay married, and if united, they're expected in the church to be together, and that's expected also in the home. I think sometimes as the church in the past, we've kind of seen divorce maybe as like an unforgivable sin, something that you can't be reconciled from. I don't think that's the case. Jesus talks about there's reasons to divorce if it comes to infidelity, that type of thing. But in all situations, it's better to stay married. But we know that God even is a God that's been divorced. We know in Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 8, I'm not going to read the verse, but God had divorced Israel, broken the covenant between them two because of why? Well, their adultery, they're cheating on Him. And so when we think of divorce, especially as Christians, we should see it as something that was not made by God, but it's not something you cannot be reconciled from, brought back to the church, forgiven from. You can be. And so we know that marriage should stay together, and you should work together for the ministry of Christ. If I think of when it comes to why we're together, it's to encourage, but it's also to do the work of Christ together. I think of all the things that I didn't realize I needed help with until I got married. It's a pretty long list. Pretty long list. And I could probably sit here for the next 20 minutes and list everything Meg does for me, but I don't think she would like me to do that, so I'm not. But Meg is a helper. Meg encourages. Meg helps, and I don't know what I would be without Meg. And when it comes to the work we do, we're a team. It's together for ministry. But Paul, he goes on in the verses 12 through 16, and there's a question about a woman who converts and her husband doesn't. And this famous verse talks about what happens if one part of the marriage is a Christian and another is not converted and unchristian. He says, but the rest I say, not to the Lord, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he must not divorce her. Okay? And if a woman has an unbelieving husband and he consents to live with her, she must not send her husband away. For an unbelieving husband is sanctified through his wife. Well, that's important. And the unbelieving wife is sanctified through her believing husband. For otherwise your children are unclean, but now, whoa, they're holy. Yet if the unbelieving one leaves, let him leave, and the brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases. But God calls us to have peace. For or how do you know, O wife, whether you will save your husband? Oh, how do you know, O husband, whether you will save your wife? This is a very interesting passage. You see, you can do ministry in the marriage, you can do ministry with the marriage, and you can do ministry through the marriage. Marriage should be about doing the work of Christ. It should be about fulfilling the Great Commission together. Should be about bringing lost sinners to Christ. Should be about obeying God's Word. And if there's a lost person in the marriage, be holy. Paul tells them here, do good. Do not leave them. Be the best Christian that you can be. Be sanctified. Do good to them. Be a good husband. Be a good wife. Do not treat them badly. I believe that we shouldn't even nag them or treat them poorly because they're an unchristian. The reason is the point of staying in a marriage when one's a Christian, not a Christian, is so you could save their soul. It's for them to be converted to Christ eventually. And I'm going to tell you, if you're constantly going home and making them feel bad or treating them poorly because they're an unchristian, well, you get more flies with honey than salt. And I believe that's what Paul's talking about here. He's telling you, have peace in your marriage. And I'm going to tell you, you're more likely to bring them to Jesus if you treat them with the love of Jesus than constantly treating them poorly. There once was a man who was divorced 26 times between 1931 and 1986. I think that's the record, 26 times. I have a few questions for him. First, what was number 26 thinking? Man, 25, and he said, I'm the one. 26, I got it. Never mind. Second question is, do you think he was a happy man marrying 26 women? Do you think that he was a Christian, maybe a professing one? Do you think he was a very good one if he was so? Well, no, I probably not. If you're so focused on women so focused on marrying over and over again, I believe it would be hard to do the will of God. I tell you this because marriage, it's a ministry doing the work of God together as one. And if you're a believing wife or a believing husband, you have an unbelieving husband or unbelieving wife, you have the ministry of pointing them back to Jesus. And so we know marriage is a gift. We know marriage is a ministry. Marriage is also a calling sent by God. And so the next section, verses 17 through 24, Paul is speaking to the divisions in the church, the ones that they've separated themselves over. He speaks to the free. Then he speaks to the slaves, those who are enslaved by other people. Then there's also the Gentiles that have converted to Christ, and then the Jewish that have converted to Christ. Then he also speaks on the uncircumcised and the circumcised, the Jew and un-Jew, and he speaks on the clean and unclean. And then in verse 17, he addresses them and says, "Only as the Lord has assigned each one, as God has called each. In this manner, let him walk, and so I direct all the churches." Paul is telling them that wherever stance you are in life, whoever you are, you're not lesser than anyone else. The married, not lesser than the unmarried. The Jew, not lesser or higher than the Gentile. The slave is not lesser than the slave master. And he says you are called in the manner of your situation. What he's telling them is that you're there for a reason. Don't try to wish you to be someone else or in a different situation. You're called in the manner that you're at. Meaning, you're there for a reason. In verse 24, he even says, "Brethren, each one of you is to remain with God in that condition in which He is called." So I think what Paul's telling them, do not try to be someone else. Glorify God wherever you are, no matter what situation you are in life. So if you're a slave, be the best slave you can, glorifying Christ. If you're a slave owner, do the will of Christ. If you're a Gentile, do the will of Christ. If you're married, do the will of Christ together. If you're unmarried, don't wish that you think your life would be better to be married. Do the will of Christ there. You're served where you're at. And I believe when it talks to the slave, he's telling them one day, well, you will not be in bondage. Look forward to that, but no, there's work you can do for Jesus in your current standing. I think this is all about contentment. I've heard so many my age, and it's a blessing for me and Meg to be married so young. And because of that, there's been a lot of young people that come to us and they've asked us about what it's like to be married and ask questions. And sometimes we give them advice on what we went through and maybe some things you can do differently. And then some we go, don't do it. You're not ready. You're not ready. But I believe one thing that a lot of people my age, especially when they're starting to get to the later 20s, they want to be married so bad. Some even think that I'm not the person I need to be unless that I'm in a marriage. And I believe that's totally against what Paul is talking about here. He's talking about being content in the situation you're at. He even talks about if celibacy is better because it gives you more time to focus on Christ. And this is not just for the married, the unmarried. This is also those going through difficult situations. Those are those that are struggling with money issues or with food. These are those that were even in slavery. He tells them, be okay where you're at. It's okay to be unmarried. It's okay to go through these difficult situations. There once was a Russian poet that I read about. He was married in 1831. And he was married for the first time then, and he called it the 113th time he had fallen in love. That's the one. 113. I did it. Obviously, he did not know what love meant fully. That was probably the 113th time he had fallen in lust. Probably the 113th time he's fallen in a strong liking. He liked them, but I don't think he understood love. Because true love, the type that should be in a marriage, well, it's a calling by God. It's a commitment between two people who make to be there together as one for a lifetime. It's not a hole in the ground that you happen to fall into. It's a calling by God that we're commanded to keep. Marriage is a calling. The fourth thing Paul talks about is that, this one might be obvious, marriage, it's a challenge. There's hardships It's challenging, and he goes on, again, to answer questions that the Gentile Christians had. And the first challenge we're going to see is the one of balance, doing it for the right reasons and maybe not doing it for the wrong ones. The question is it better to be married or to stay single as a Christian? Which is better? And his answer is verse 25 to 28. He says, "Now concerning virgins, I have no command of the Lord, but I give an opinion." All right, we'll stop there for a second. I love when Paul steps out for a second and says, Jesus hasn't commanded you, but me, as Paul, living a long life, this is my opinion for you. Remember, this is his opinion. I think, then, that this is a good in view of the present distress, that it is good for a man to remain as he is, single. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be released. Are you released from a wife? Do not seek a new wife. But if you marry, you have not sinned, and if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Yet such will have trouble for his life, and I'm trying to spare you. I love that. Paul, we have to remember, this is a challenging time for the church in Corinth. They're going through persecution, they're going through sin issues, they're going through splits, and he's saying, if you're married, good, you have not sinned. But if you're unmarried, you want to be married, that's good, you have not sinned. But it might be best if you just stay where you're at. Don't wish differently. He says, I'm trying to spare you because I know you're going through a really hard time there in Corinth. And if you get married right now, it's not going to make things better. It's going to be harder to do the things you need to do because you have to split your time between your wife or your husband and the work of Jesus. And he tells them that you might have to divide your time between the church and your spouse, and so it might be good just to stay where you are. He's trying to spare them from the pain of splitting their heart in two places. And he continues in verses 32 through 35, and he says this, "But I want you to be free from concern. One is unmarried is concerned about the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But one who is married is concerned about the things of the world, how will he please his wife?" His interests, they're divided. The woman who is unmarried and the virgin is concerned about the things of the Lord, and she may be holy in body and spirit. But the one who is married is concerned about the things of the world. Well, how can she please her husband? Ooh, this is a hard thing to read, but the truth is that it's easier to focus on the things of the Lord if your time is not split, if you're just unmarried. And if you're married, I'm going to be honest, this makes sense to me because you're more worried about protecting, loving, caring for your spouse, and you could use that effort for the church and for the work of Christ. And I'm not saying it's bad to be married, I would never say that, but Paul is making the case that it's okay to be celibate. It's okay to be unmarried. Honestly, if you're in that situation, it gives you more time to be able to work for Jesus. The second challenge we see, that's the one of divided thoughts. The second one is the challenge to let your family go. Verse 38, the question was, is it okay to let my daughter marry? And he responds and says, so then both who gives his own virgin daughter in marriage does well. It's good to marry them off. And he who does not give in marriage will do better. I love that verse. I love that. We have to remember the context of what's happening here. This is a time of turbulence in the church, a lot of problems. And what Paul says, if you marry your daughter, that's great. If you don't, that's even better. You can keep her, but you have to remember in this time, if you were to have daughters in your home and you're the father of this daughter, you're responsible for them. You got to take care of them. You're the one that their income, that you support them. And he's saying if you're in a difficult situation, it's better, well, to keep them under your wings than to send them off to someone that you're not sure for sure will take care of them. That makes sense if times are difficult, if there's things happening in the culture of the day. And that is what Paul is telling them. But we must remember, this is not say this and do that, or this is wrong or this is right. What he's saying is it's better in this context. And the father would be responsible either way, if he married or unmarried. The last challenge we see is the last verse of chapter 7. It's the challenge of loss. If you're married, the truth is that means that you could lose someone that you love so deeply. And the question is, can I marry if my spouse dies? Paul says, a wife is bound as long as her husband lives, but if her husband is dead, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. Again, I love verse 40. In my opinion, his expert opinion, he says, if she is happier, if she remains the way she is, single, I think that I also have the Spirit of God. Man, I like this. I love this. He says, if you are widowed, you lose your spouse, and you're happy, stay where you're at. It's okay. You're not sinning against God for never remarrying. Again, the Jews, this is what they believe. If your spouse died, you need to get remarried because it's instituted by the Lord. But he's saying if you are single, if you're or widowed, it's okay to stay that way, not marry. But if you would like to remarry and it would make you happy, well, that's good too. I just like that. You see, marriage, it presents its challenges. Its challenge of splitting or dividing your efforts, the challenge of letting go, and also the challenge of the possibility of loss. But we must see it's worth it. It's a gift from God and should be used to glorify Him together. David Rubin wrote, marriage is like a long trip on a very long rowboat. If one rocks and the other has to steady it, and if not, they both go to the bottom together. I like that. Marriage is a gift from God. It should be used to glorify Him. It's a calling by the Lord, and it's sometimes a challenge that pushes us closer to Him and His will. I've got a few challenges. If you are married, thank God that you can, for your spouse, and ask Him how you can use your marriage to glorify Him and do His work. If you're unmarried and never been married, thank God that you can glorify Him. You don't have to split your times and efforts. If you're divorced or widowed, know that you can still glorify God and do His work in the situation that you are currently in. Like Paul says, each one of you are to remain with God in the condition which He has called. Wherever you're at, you can do the work of the Lord. Someone said, success in marriage involves more than finding the right mate. It also requires being the right one. Let's pray. Lord, I thank You so much for this day. I thank You for Your word that we can go through these hard questions and situations and know that we can do Your will. We know the answers. When it comes to marriage, Lord, if we're in this covenant, I ask that You help us to glorify You and do Your work together. I ask that You help us to know, even if we're divorced or widowed, that we can still do Your will, or even in a situation where we've never been married. Lord, I ask that You help us be content where we are, knowing that we're called to do Your work. I thank You for Your precious word, and I thank You for Your Son, Jesus. And it's His name I pray. Amen.